All of man's problems stem from his inability to sit alone in an empty room. And that's because why?
Yeah.
When you turn down all the volume around you,
You got to face yourself. I had filled my life with so many things to just keep me away from that moment. Because if it was quiet enough and still enough and clear enough, I've got to look in the mirror and face what I'm dealing
if
with.
you're not willing to walk away, then you're not free. I mean that even with a relationship, with a marriage. Like my wife and I, every month, hey, do you still want to be in this?
Yeah.
Because sometimes it gets difficult, right? Especially raising.
Well, ours
we have
has
an
been
11-year-old.
pretty smooth, but I can imagine.
So easy.
I can imagine you've been through other stuff. For us, it's just we look at couples that struggle and we're just like, that must suck.
So
Continue,
stupid.
sir.
Here's the 3-step plan to improve your.
Think about it. I have never put it the way you put it, but it's a beautiful. Solitude doesn't mean you're by yourself still with other voices.
Yeah.
It means you realize there's something in you that is special enough to get its own time.
You know when you're healthy if you're able to sit by yourself and be in silence. Because I know so many people who just cannot do that ever. They have to have music on. They have to be stimulated by a TV or a screen, or because they're so unwell in themselves.
And it's not their fault
It's
either.
not.
Their culture has indoctrinated them that not only is it the right thing to do, it's the thing that you should do, right?
Lights On Podcast, Joshua Fields Millburn, my friend.
Thanks for having me.
It is such an honor, and Laura shows up when she feels like it. This happened to be one that she did not want to miss. And we are coming to you not live and direct from Tulsa, Oklahoma, in case anybody picked that up. How are you?
Outstanding.
I've already been blessed and impacted just talking to you before we even threw this thing on. So our history quickly before I ask you to explain a little bit about who you are. So there would be people who are, avid listeners of our podcast who have yet to experience kind of all that you represent. To me, you're one of the guys I look to in our culture and I go, he's got it right. And to be able to meet you, we did your podcast not too long ago. It just was powerful. I left impacted again, almost annoyingly so. And I told you I wasn't ready to see the doc back in the day when it came out, which we'll talk about. But now I think the older we get, the more we're interested in kind of who you are. So it's just a real privilege. Thank you for doing this.
I was talking to Laura beforehand, and she was like, I started watching your documentary a few years ago. And I was like, but I really like
my stuff.
Yes. And you know what? I like my stuff too. Here's a weird paradox of being one of the minimalists.
Yeah.
Is
No, you're the.
I actually get way more value from the things that I own. People often think we're like a rock band or something because Ryan looks like a aging rock guitarist. He's got long hair.
You look like James Dean.
Yes.
And I actually get way more value from the few items I own because they're not watered down by tens of thousands of trinkets, of clutter.
Yeah.
Anything that gets in the way is clutter, basically. And so when we started the Minimalists back in 2010, it was really about simplifying our lives, getting the stuff out of the way that was in the way. I think quite often that starts with the material possessions in our lives, right? The average American household, according to the LA Times, has 300,000 items in it. And that'd be awesome if it was making us happier and more content, more joyous, more peaceful. But how's that working out for us?
Right.
Yes. Quick snapshot for those that are just trying to figure out and place who you are. My experience goes back to a groundbreaking documentary, 2010, called The Minimalists, which you guys just kind of took the world by storm with coming out of an angle nobody would have expected. And then 2024, we're here. And I wanted to ask you, do you still believe that stuff? Because if you don't, I'm in. If we're into more stuff, I'm open. But in the case that you still believe that message, what does the message look like from 2010? And if you're watching at home, go to Netflix, watch this doc. It's only like an hour.
Yeah.
It's not like an extensive long walk, but it definitely opens up your eyes to like, what am I doing? Like what? So, and you break down the need for our society to really take a second look at, how much do you need what you think you need? How much do you have? How much can you use? And you've just started a conversation that hasn't stopped. So from 2010 to right now, you still believe it?
Well, I grew up really poor. And what I believed at the time is the reason we were so unhappy is because we didn't have any money, right? I grew up in a really dysfunctional home. Before that, dysfunctional family was like a really cool thing. Back then, it was just poor kid, Dayton, Ohio. My father was abusing my mother, and we were able to escape from it. And I grew up really poor. Food stamps, government assistance, in a relatively impoverished neighborhood. And I thought, wow, we're so discontented. It's because we don't have any money. And so when I turned 18, I went out and I got that entry-level corporate job, and I spent the next decade climbing the corporate ladder. And by age 30, I sort of had everything I ever wanted. I had the 6-figure salary, the luxury cars, plural, the big suburban house with more toilets than people. I had all the stuff to fill every corner of my consumer-driven life. Now, that's not to say that I think material possessions are bad. I don't. I think we all need some stuff. But in a way, I began to worship material possessions. Stuff became a god of mine. And so by age 30, 2 events happened to me. My mom died. My marriage ended both in the same month. This is back in 2009. And I started to look around and question everything going on in my life. And yes, I was living a successful corporate career. I made really good money, but I spent even better money. And so I was broke. I had a ton of debt. But I also had a lot of stress and anxiety and discontent in my life. I told myself a story, that I would someday be happy. And there were these guys who I aspired to be like. In fact, I had a whole life plan ahead of me. By age 35, I'm going to be a vice president. By age 40, I'll be a senior vice president. By age 45, I'll be a C-level executive. And then I'll have it made. But as I started working with those guys, and I started getting closer to them, I noticed a lot of them, as I got closer to them, they were kind of miserable. I had one boss who was 50 years old, and he seemed like a perfectly nice guy, but he was on his 3rd divorce and 2nd heart attack at age 50. And we all tell ourselves, you know what? I'll be different. But if I follow the same recipe, I'm probably going to bake the same cake. And I realized that wasn't a cake that I liked the flavor of. And so I started to look around at all this stuff and realized that I bought all these things to make me happy, to make me more content, but they weren't doing their job. In fact, they were covering up that happiness or that contentment that was already going on there inside me. And so over the course of 8 months after my mom died and my marriage ended, I just started letting go of stuff, simplifying my life. I stumbled across this concept of minimalism, and I found different minimalists from all over the world, and they were simplifying their lives in radically different ways. There were single entrepreneurs who were traveling the world, and everything they owned fit in their backpack. And that was kind of cool, but I like owning a couch, and I like having a coffee table, and there are things I enjoy having that they couldn't have because it didn't augment their lifestyle. In fact, it would have been clutter for them. And then I found someone there's a guy named Leo Babalta who lives up in San Francisco area. He has 6 kids, and yet he's a minimalist. And I realized no matter where you are in life, you can simplify your life. Whether you call it minimalism or simplicity or austerity. I'm not an ascetic. I don't shun material possessions. In fact, as soon as you shun something, you're forever tied to it. You define yourself by the things that you renounce quite often, right?
Wow.
And so, yes, I still find value in living with less, but I've also realized that the stuff is just the initial bite at the apple. It goes way beyond the material possessions for me. Simplifying my life with the stuff, that's easy because it's all there in front of you. Now, it's not easy in the sense that, it takes a lot to get rid of excess material because we have a lot of attachment, a lot of clinging going on there. But as I started simplifying the external, I realized, you know what? Our material possessions are just this physical manifestation of what's going on inside us.
Yes.
If I have a lot of external clutter, guess what else I have? Mental clutter, emotional clutter, spiritual clutter, calendar clutter, relationship clutter, digital clutter, career clutter. I was talking to Hector earlier on about identity clutter as well.
Wow.
This is who I am as a person, and it's defined by the 2 Lexuses I own.
Right.
Yeah,
Lexi,
wow.
I guess is the
Lex-
plural.
Sure. Yeah.
No, I love that thought because I know for me as a mum and, home being like my safe space, and I'm very much like my biggest need is peace. Like I love a peaceful environment. And I know for me, if my house is cluttered, it does something to my brain, literally. Like that anxiety and the stress, it overwhelms me. So for me, my kitchen island has to be bare. Like I don't want anything on it. And
Amen.
like little things like that, I'm like, I don't know, I'm like very, like going to bed at night, the kitchen has to be clean because when I wake up in the morning, I don't want to wake up and have a clear mind and not worry about the things in the kitchen sink and, you know, stuff like that. I find it very interesting that our mind and our body is attached to how your outside environment.
Yeah, what's going on in here tends to manifest outwardly, and those things then amplify our lives. That's why I'm not against material possessions, because if I have a curated amount of material possessions that actually add value to my life, they enhance my life, they augment my life in some way, as opposed to get in the way. The funny thing is what we often do when we have that clutter, we don't minimize it. What do? We organize it.
Organize.
And so we go to the Container Store, which I think is one of the worst purveyors of clutter because it makes it look like we're actually doing something. It apes the form of decluttering, but it's actually just getting bins and boxes so I can have a nice ordinal system of junk. And now I have a basement full of junk and a closet full of junk and the spare bedroom's full of junk. It might be tidy, but it's still
it looks
a lot
neat,
of... That's right.
But still, wow.
There's two conversations that I hear that I think are so pertinent to this, because the one conversation is the people that are still striving to get all the stuff because they think that. And then there's another one where there's the people that have all the stuff and they know that it's not doing anything for them. And typically I find that people are on these two things. And we have a funny joke because there's the common phrase, money can't make you happy. And me and Laura always say, can make you kind of happy. Like I was talking,
nice.
I was talking to a friend who is worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and he's just going through something like everybody else. And I was just talking to him about money. He's like, it's funny, man, Carl, when I got all this money, I thought it would solve a lot, but it really doesn't. I was like, yeah, but you're a lot more comfortable miserable than you would be if you were broke and miserable. So let's just call a spade a spade.
Yes.
You know, it is what it is. But I think there's something to be said for, you know, that so much internal is reflected in what we have. And I told you when we did your podcast, when I got to rehab, I was shocked about some of the foundational steps were just simply ordering your night and your day and pick up your room. And there's, you know, CEOs, there's, you know, very wealthy guys in there. And we're all nodding our heads going, yeah, I need to pick up my room more because it's a direct reflection. Like I've never once gotten to a car that's filled with Cheetos bags and junk and crap is doing awesome. I just have never found that correlation. And in my own life, I know if you get in my car and there's stuff around, you don't have to ask me, what are you stressed about? Like, what are you not handling? What are you running from? So I think it's, there's going to be people who are listening that are like, wait a second, my goal is to get the stuff because it's going to mean these things. Even though there is a swath of people that will stand there and wave their arms and say, when you get all the stuff you think you want, it's not going to, it might change your status with people that don't matter, but it's not going to change what you need to feel inside.
Yeah, in our first Netflix documentary, we quoted Jim Carrey, where he says, I wish everyone could be rich and successful so they realize it's not the key to their happiness. I'm paraphrasing there. But ultimately, I think your friend who made hundreds of millions of dollars, yes, he was able to buy more comfort, but you can't buy contentment.
No, talk about that. When you talk about contentment, because your countenance would strike me as somebody that's content. You know, you can't really fake a countenance. You can't fake I guess my son would say it's an aura. I refuse to use that word. But your countenance is kind of what you present when you enter any environment, and you have contentment. And in that 2010 to right now, can you say confidently, like, hey, man, this stuff, because, you know, as a former preacher, you look back on some of the stuff you used to preach, you're like, I don't know. I don't know. I've changed a lot. And when it comes to something that, you know, 2010 to now, can you confidently sit there and go, man, it's really radically impacted my life. And not only am I not changing it, I'm turning up the dial. Is that how you feel when you think about it?
I think if you look back to every ancient wisdom tradition, whether it's Jesus or Taoists or Hindus, they'll tell you that, of course, the externalities aren't going to make you happy. The happiness actually gets covered up by externalities. And what I realized is that when I was so stressed out and overwhelmed, it's because I was constantly looking for happiness out there. That's what consumerism is, by the way. So yes, you can buy comfort, but you can't buy contentment. On the Minimalist podcast, we had Arthur Brooks. He's a Harvard professor on there recently. I just wrote a book with Oprah, who lives down the street from where we are right now. And he wrote a book about the science of happiness. And he talks about happiness that really has three components. It's enjoyment, it's satisfaction, and it's purpose. Now, you can buy enjoyment to some extent or buy things that you enjoy, really. And so that's part of it. But you can't really buy satisfaction. And you know what? There's the Rolling Stones song, I can't get no satisfaction. That's not true. The truth is I can't keep satisfaction. I can't cling on to satisfaction. That's not how satisfaction works. But ultimately, we all know you can't buy purpose, right? Just like you can't buy love. Love is not transactional. Sometimes relationships are. If I go to the grocery store and I want to buy some vegetables and some fruit, there's a transactional relationship there, but that's not what love is. And we often try to buy things through a transaction that are non-transactional. And I think that's where consumerism is. Happiness can't be bought. Contentment can't be bought, although we treat it like a transaction. And so what happens is I will spend money to acquire things that give me a burst of pleasure, and we mistake pleasure for happiness. Consumerism is simple. It's just an ideology that acquiring something outside of myself will make me complete or happy. That's consumerism. Now, we do that with our material possessions, but we also have relationship consumerism. And now, of course, what's the biggest one? Digital consumerism. Scrolling is the new smoking, right? Because I'm just going to find happiness somewhere. It's got to be in this feed somewhere, right? And so there's digital consumerism. There's identity consumerism. If I have enough degrees or letters before my name or after my name, it makes me a better me. That's a type of consumerism. There's also inverse consumerism, which I'd like to talk about. Please. Because what happens quite often is we get everything we ever wanted, and we find out what? Everything I ever wanted isn't actually what I want. It's not doing it for me. And so then we say, you know what? What if I get rid of everything? Maybe that will make me happy. And I think it's one of the most common misconceptions about minimalism is it's just setting aside everything, and therefore that is going to make you happy. No. In fact, at first, it might make you way more discontented when you simplify your life. You come home to an empty house and sulk because you've gotten rid of all your pacifiers, the things that allowed you to cover up the discontent. And now that discontent is all you're left with. There's this great Pascal quote. He said, all of man's problems stem from his inability to sit alone in an empty room. And that's because why? When you turn down all the volume around you,
you got to face yourself.
There's the volume in here gets turned way up.
I mean, it hits home for me because I was I had filled my life with so many things to just keep me away from that moment. Because if it was quiet enough and still enough and clear enough, I've got to look in the mirror and face what I'm dealing with. And I don't want to do that. So I'm going to fill up as much of my life as I can with activity and I
call that calendar clutter.
Calendar clutter is a real thing.
That was my biggest thing.
If you have nothing to do, who are you going to hang out with?
Right.
Yourself.
Yeah.
And what's that like?
Yeah, it's terrifying if you don't like yourself.
If you hate yourself, you're the last person you want to be around.
That's right. And also I appreciate there are different social dynamics. Like I'm a pretty extreme introvert, so I spend like 80+% of my time alone. And
sounds beautiful, actually.
But for the longest time, I filled my calendar with all these commitments. The reason I was able to do this at the drop of a dime because my calendar had virtually nothing on this week. It's a Thursday. This is the first thing I had on my calendar all week. And that's just because I say no to everything unless it's a hell yes.
Something that you're passionate about.
Yeah. If I don't feel like it's a hell yes, then the answer is just no. Not because I think it's bad, but because I can't make those. In a vacuum, there are a lot of yeses. But when I pan out and I look, well, I have only 168 hours in a week, and hopefully I'm sleeping for, 70 or 80 of those. So I have about 100 hours a week at this point. What am I going to do with those 100 hours? And if it's not a hell yes, I really feel compelled to do that, then why am I saying yes to it? Is it because my identity's tied up into saying yes? Is it because I don't want to disappoint other people? And if that's the case, am I willing to just disappoint myself in order to make everyone else happy? And if that's the case, am I ever going to make everyone happy? If you have just 500 Facebook friends, try making just them happy, right? It's impossible because if you make this person happy, you might actually make that person happy. And then you bring religion and politics into it, and good luck making anyone happy ever. And so I think what happens is we overcommit to these things because we're afraid to say yes to what's actually important. So we say yes to the things that keep our hands moving and our minds breathless in a way, but we don't actually get to focus on what is important or meaningful or purposeful to us.
I've never heard anybody say mind breathless, but if you think of your mind being out of breath from running, it's actually a beautiful picture of what people can see, because your mind can be like that. You're probably fatigued. You've probably been running, so fast. So 2010 was a different time, and you guys were already ahead of the game with maybe even foreseeing what was coming in regards to the onslaught of things telling us what we need. Can you speak to that now? Because it's like, I have been shocked about, if you have a conversation, like I had a conversation with Laura about trucks one time. Since then, every algorithm of everything I'm on, trucks. I'm like, I don't think I wanted one as bad as I do, but man, it's on my mind every day.
Yeah.
And then you spread that out to like, somehow the social media storm is just informing people on what they need, and it's nonstop. So if you're not even paying attention to this, there's a reason why you always feel empty, because you just don't have enough. It's like I have a love-hate with Amazon Prime. Like something comes to our door, and I'm always like, Lozzie, was that you? Nope. And Roman? Like, who's ordering stuff and what is it? Like, who's paying for it? Number one. But like the ability to get stuff the moment you need it,
yes.
And then to watch our kids go from elated to deflated is, to me, a sign of the times. Like, man, you've wanted that poster for so long, and it's here and it's up, and now it's like, cool, new poster or whatever it might be. So what do you think about, like, do we even have a chance when it comes to dealing with all the stuff the world is throwing at people to tell them that they need? Like, what do we do? What do you see?
What you're describing is often the objects of our desire. As soon as we acquire them, they become the objects of our discontent. I know your story, obviously, that became true there as well, right? But beyond that, it can be as simple as a material possession, a poster, like the thing that I coveted. As soon as I got it, it's like, whatever.
Yeah.
And we move on to the next object of desire. Part of the problem is this lack of friction. We've removed all the friction, which sounds great. Oh, you got rid of the friction in your life. It's the one-click shopping, the same-day delivery, and it's the swiping right, and I can match with infinite numbers of people, right?
Yeah.
And that sounds great on the surface, and there are a lot of merits behind that.
Yeah.
But the truth is that when we remove all friction, we also lose traction. And when you lose traction, what happens? You're on ice, and you can't get to where you're going if you don't have any traction. And so some things I've done when I've simplified my life, I've removed some of those things that are hyper conveniences. I've also done an experiment this year where I've opted out of the algorithm altogether. Last year was the Minimalists' most successful year on social media.
Congrats.
We reached about 500 million people on social media, which sounds really impressive.
We're there as Lights On podcast. We're new. We're getting there. We're in the ballpark.
Well, what I'll tell you is reaching 500 million sounds like an impressive number. So you realize here's one person, two people. They might see me for 0.8 of a second. Is it really a penetrating message?
Right.
The vast majority of them, no, they see it for a moment and they move on. So even though we have acquired 4 million or so followers on social media, we just left social media this year.
Wow.
And decided that, you know what, this might not be the best financial decision, but we were talking earlier before we started recording, I don't pretend that money isn't important. Money is important to us in the society that we live in. But I don't want it to be in the driver's seat.
Yeah.
Because every time I put it in the driver's seat, it makes me miserable. But it is a passenger in the car, and therefore it deserves consideration. But I found that when we started making the podcast for social media, it was corrupting in several ways. It would corrupt what I was trying to create for the podcast. When I was writing books or doing live events, and would this be a good clip for TikTok or Instagram? Is that why I'm doing this? And in a weird way, I started to feel like an employee for a weird corporation called YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, Inc.
Oh my gosh.
I felt like I was working for them, although they weren't compensating me. Now, we don't do ads on our podcast. We don't monetize our YouTube channel either. And so it's because we just don't like advertisements. Not a moral stance. It's just I'm kind of grossed out by ads personally. And what I've learned in doing that is I'm not even getting paid by these places that I'm volunteering for, essentially.
So true.
And it led me to do it, to feeling obligated. It went from I get to do this. I get to do this podcast. I get to do these book tours. Once a month in Southern California and LA, we do something called Sunday Symposium, these live events. And we limit it to just 250 people, and that is it. And this weekend, in fact, I'm giving a talk about busyness, the calendar clutter sort of thing. And in doing that, I find that, we're not going to reach a broad audience, but it's going so much deeper. And at least for me, I find it to be so much more meaningful than how did that video perform? How many clicks or views?
Yeah.
And the question ultimately is, what are you optimizing for?
Yeah.
And I wasn't ever optimizing for fame. This whole minimalist thing was like a really beautiful accident. I thought I was just going to be a fiction writer when I left the corporate world.
Yeah.
And I realized that, you know what? I can add value to people's lives through this whole minimalism thing as well. And so we opted out of social media, not renouncing it. I'm always open to going back.
But how are you going to know what strangers think about you? How do you survive? If you take yourself out of that mix, how are you going to know what someone who has no relationship with you or any investment in your life is ever going to think about what you're doing?
It's a fair point.
So I guess that's a detriment. If you get off social media, you eliminate the opinions of strangers that you don't care about and they don't care about you. So I don't know. You might want to rethink that.
Everything about insecurity is really rooted in that, right?
So true.
The only reason we ever care what other people think, especially people we've never met, is because there's some sort of dissatisfaction with myself. And so if I don't feel that dissatisfaction inside me, it's impossible for other people to make me feel insecure.
Correct.
And I think the algorithm and social media, but especially algorithmic social media, which is the corrupting side of social media, the algorithmic side of social media is really an insecurity amplifier unlike anything we've ever seen. And that type of digital clutter is making us miserable. It's making us depressed. It's making us upset. And it's also making us compare each other in really strange ways. And we're comparing these bits of our lives in 2D, literally a 2D screen, with an actual 3D human being, and wondering why we feel incomplete.
Yeah. One of the most painful realities of the social media validation. What am I doing it for? I've watched our kids. One time they were watching them all scroll, and it's an automatic to go to the comments. And I asked them, I said, "Is that a thing?" They're like, "Yeah." What do you mean? It's like, that's what you do. I'm like, well, we didn't used to do that, but that apparently is what every kid in the world now does. So if you look on an Instagram or a TikTok, before the video's over, you're looking at comments. And it's so fascinating to me because what it's reinforcing is this isn't good unless. And so I've talked to even us doing our own podcast. It's like, who are we doing it for and why? So we've landed those planes. So whether it does these 5 things that people will deem successful, whether that happens or not, that's for you. That's for your judgment. We did what we felt called to do. It's a success. Yeah. It's a win. So when you see, and it always feels good to get validated. Like it's like, and we're not like being naive here. If you post something and there's tons of people that love it, it does feel good. The problem with that though is, well, what if that reaction's different? Does that mean what I said is less? And I see people leaning into the game, especially my old field. The ministry game is wrought with people searching for clicks and likes, and even doing this pod, like whether it's doing certain clips. I've talked with Hector. I'm like, man, if we say a certain name in a hook, or if, you guys edit together something where we're talking about sex 4 times in 2 minutes, sure, maybe that will produce A, B, and C, but is it genuine to what we want? And if that means we can't play these games, then we just opt out. So to actually be sitting across from somebody because everybody says they could do what you do, you're the only one that I know that has done it. To step off of social media doesn't make any business sense. There are people who will just try to pick that apart and yet you still succeed and thrive and impact people. So I think it's powerful, but I think that question of why are you doing what you're doing is one of the most powerful ones you can ask. Like, why am I getting dressed right now? Who's this for? Yeah. Why am I about to preach this sermon? Why am I going to do this podcast? Like this podcast, say, well, who's this for? What's the purpose? Is it because you have a big platform and we want this? Or is it because, no, your message is beautiful and we want to talk about what's possible if you really realize less is more. So yeah, I just think it's powerful what you are embodying though, because this isn't theory for you. You really have done a lot of this, and I think it's just exceptional.
I think if you're not willing to walk away, then you're not free. And I found that to be true in the corporate world.
Wow.
And I mean that with everything. I mean that even with a relationship, with a marriage, if you don't have the willingness to walk away. My wife and I, every month, hey, do you still want to be in this?
Yeah.
Because sometimes it gets difficult, right? Especially raising.
Well, ours
we have
has
an
been
11-year-old.
pretty smooth, but I can imagine.
So easy.
I can imagine you've been through other stuff. For us, it's just we look at couples that struggle, and we're just like, that must suck.
So
Continue,
stupid.
sir.
Here's the 3-step plan to improve you. And that's always the problem with these sort of prescriptive things, right? Is it promises something that can't ever be delivered, right?
Right.
Here are the 7 steps for a successful marriage. It's like, well, I did all 7.
Right.
And for some reason, I'm still not happy.
Yeah,
and it's ostensibly successful. And I found that was true in the corporate world. I walked away from that at age 30. I was managing 150 retail stores back in the Midwest, and which I know is really ironic with the whole minimalism thing. But I was ostensibly successful. After growing up really poor, I thought that was going to make me happy, and it didn't. It brought me a sense of identity, and I had an impressive job title, because when you meet someone new, what's the first question you ask them?
What do you do?
What do you do?
Right.
That's the identity clutter, right?
Yeah.
That's the thing that
What's your better option? Because I've heard a couple, but once you hear that that's the worst and the dumbest thing to ask somebody,
yes.
You're like, I will never ask that again. What do you love? Rather than, hey, what do you do? What do you say?
Well, let's talk about the question behind the question there. What does someone ask when they really say that? A, they're looking for this just conversation filler, right? But what the implicit question is, where do you work? What is your job title? So I can estimate how much money you make, and therefore I can know what your net worth is.
How important are you?
Right. So I can identify how important are you to me, right? As opposed to like, hey, what are you passionate about? Isn't that a much more interesting question?
Oh, that's a good one.
Now, it might match up with your job, and if so, that's great, but it doesn't need to. As well, we all have to pay the bills, right? So we can have a job that allows us to pay the bills, but I might be passionate about something outside of that. And so if someone asks me, like, what do you do? I might say I'm really passionate about writing. I usually don't say I'm a writer, because again, that can be identity clutter as well.
Right.
I mean, I've written 5 books. I'm much more interested in the verb than I am the noun.
I like that.
I like writing. You can call me a writer. It's a useful label. But as soon as I begin to identify as, this is who I am, look at me, I am an author. Well, that really gets in the way of the act of writing itself. And that's the part that I actually enjoy.
Yeah, the book I wrote as a fellow author, not that it matters, no. I used to.
In the moment, I read it.
Yeah, but I did that for a while. People say, what do you do? I'm like, I'm an author. Because it just gives you that esteem. It's just fun to be like, well, what do you do? I'm an author. Yeah. No,
So it sounds impressive. So we're all looking, this is where the identity clutter comes in.
Yeah.
We're all looking for that one line that we could put on a business card, or now it's an Instagram bio. Or
now I'm acceptable.
Yes.
This will be
Please accept me,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I remember
It's
there's
the same with college. I've found that so funny too. Like, what college did you go to? I'm
Yeah.
like, who cares?
She's from
Right.
Australia.
But I'm
she
Australian,
opted out of
so I
school
just
in 10th
never-
grade.
I never got that part, but yeah, it's very
Well, yeah, the college
interesting.
thing, it's not as bad as it used to be, but it there's a joke about, like, if you go to a community college, you mumble it. If you I go to Oklahoma State. Cool. I go to Oklahoma State Junior College. Yeah, what do you do? Yeah, as if the type of school you're describing is an indictment or a validation of who you are.
Right. This is who I am as a person. I remember I spoke at a conference once, and they had us send in our bios beforehand, and I just copied whatever my Twitter bio was at the time, and it just said, I'm a simple man, and that's all it said. And then they handed out these, like, brochures at the conference. It's this thick brochure of everyone who was speaking at the conference. It had everyone's long bio. This
You're a
Harvard
simple
professor
man.
and this,
Gosh,
and
that's
this
great.
guy's a computer scientist at Georgetown. And then it gets to mine, and it says, Joshua Fields Millburn. I'm a simple man. And more people came up to me in that conference to comment on that, because it wasn't I didn't know that they were going to print this out in some sort of booklet. And had I known, I probably would have given them the Emmy-nominated New York Times, blah, blah, blah. But, like, this was actually so much more interesting.
Yeah.
And what does that mean? It means that what you omit, what you forego, what you let go of is often so much more interesting. Your willingness to walk away from even the identity clutter is way more interesting than, look at the notches
Yeah.
on my resume.
No, we just had a huge combo with our daughters. That's why we're here in Cali, dropping them off at school. But it was just, we're relentlessly trying to fast forward them into a life where you don't need anybody else to accept you because you accept yourself. And it's such a powerful place to be when your circumstances can change, but you can stay steady. And we had trial by fire as a family. We lost a lot of the money that we had. We lost a lot of the ability to do what we wanted to do. And as a family, we found out in that trial that we're doing some of this right because we might even be happier.
Yeah.
So we lost a lot of the stuff that people would think, and there was, for a season there, our family outing was just to walk around Target. Our kids still remember that, though. They love it. And it was a very hard, horrible time, but we didn't have the ability to go to this restaurant or let's go to Six Flags. For a time there, it's we're going to just sit here and hold hands, but we remembered that. And Laura's always been like that. Our whole marriage, the bank account has not determined her passion or her hospitality gift or her ability to love people. And I'm sure she didn't love proving that again, but it just reminded me again, coming on, I'm 45, we're coming into a beautiful part of our life. And it's we're really doubling down on this stuff that circumstances can't change. Because you get a house. I heard another social media guy talking about, he thought he'd be happy when he got his first $1 million. That was so far out there. And he was like, but then I got $1 million. Then I found out the government wants almost half of it. I had already spent almost half of it on my house and my car. And now I got my dream. And now I'm in debt for a decade just like that. And that's the truth about it. Because if $1 million is your goal, cool. But who are you going to be when you get that? And that's kind of my process now. It's if I want something, what's that going to be? Is it going to change me? And I've done it out loud with you a bunch of times. I'm like, nah, that's actually, if I had that house in Montecito, that one will change me.
That would be great.
Yeah, if you think about something, it's if I got that, I think I want this. So let's just picture myself in there. Nah, I'd still be annoyed with the same things, frustrated with the same things. And it's just a beautiful way to process it because the impulse doesn't get the throne anymore.
What is your process for thinking about if you want something or do I need that? What is the steps for someone who's okay, I love the sound of, minimalism or whatever. What do you do? What's the first steps?
It's much more about the boundaries we set up in our lives. You can call them rules, whatever they are. But in fact, on our website, we've got this free download. People can go to theminimalists.com. I don't want anything from you for it, but it's just
16. We have nothing to give you for it, so it's okay.
There you go. It's 16 rules for living with less. And sometimes it's just about understanding how those things will add value to my life.
Yeah.
But it's also about the things that we hold on to. Because it's true that I might get immense value from something I own today, but it doesn't mean I'll get value from it a year from now or 5 years from now. And so I have to keep questioning. I wish there was a list I could say, you know what, Laura, here's the 100 items you should own. And if you own these 100 items, you'll be happy. No more than this, nothing less.
Have you ever given away something you regretted?
I've never regretted it, but if I did regret it, I'd let go of the regret as well. And I could talk to you about that. There are times where I felt a twinge of, why did I get rid of that? But I also have gotten rid of things that were my favorite things intentionally. I remember one of the very first interviews I did way back in 2010, probably 2011, somewhere in there. The journalist asked me, so what are some of your favorite things? And it was specifically in the context of clothes. So I said, and they said, can you send pictures of them? We'll put it on in the article. It was my favorite shirt, my favorite pair of jeans, and my favorite pair of shoes. I said, here are my 3 favorite pieces of clothes. But then I got to thinking, wait a minute, why are these my favorite pieces of clothes? Because I've told myself a story that these are my favorite things, right? And so afterward, I emailed the journalist. I said, hey, can you append your article and say, I'd like to give away my 3 favorite things.
That's awesome.
Just to see what it does to me. And guess what happened? I gave them away. And 3 other things became my favorite things, right? And it's because I understood those things didn't make me who I am. Right. And regardless of what shirt I wear, I'm still me. If I were to wear a nice leopard print shirt, then I would still be
It's not
me.
lost on
Also,
me.
your chest is kind of showing a lot. Was
It's
that
not-
intentional?
I mean, if I had that chest, come on.
Well, I wore this because it's an item I've had for over a decade, and I wanted to prove. No, I'm just kidding. It's not lost on me that I'm like, I didn't bring that much on this trip, and I'm like, I'm here with you, talking about minimalism in a
And you
leopard
went in a
rayon
leopard.
people versus shirt that I love. That someone will surely ask me, why is that button done?
Oh, that's why I was saying.
I love those
You're
people.
gonna get
People can watch a whole
comment.
podcast and then just write, your one button was pretty low. It's like, oh, that got you, did it? And really put you over the edge.
the whole.
You didn't hear anything we talked about. It's my button. But yeah, I do think that my leopard shirt is ridiculous, but it's one of my favorite things. Question on this.
Yes.
There's probably better segues. I'm learning. But when it comes to memories, I'm fascinated by some of the things that you've talked about because my mom, shout out to Kathy, I love you, Mom. She's so good at saving stuff you didn't think you would want. And so there's this beautiful line of, like, the other day we stumbled upon some photos that she found, and it was amazing. And I'm also aware of the other night I'm sitting there with my college roommate, still my best friend, talking to our girls about our college stories. No photos, no evidence, but the memories.
That's right.
The memories are what you got to keep track of. And I didn't have any visuals to show them, but we just talked for an hour about stories that will never be on a podcast. And I left there going, man, that was really beautiful. And when I think about, saving heirlooms.
The Leyden, what are the Leydenhosen that your mum saved for you?
Oh yeah, the
from when you were
picture
4?
of me in Lederhosen. Like
No, we actually have the
actual
physical Leydenhosens in a Ziploc bag that she's sent me.
So how
Like, what do I do with that?
How do you work your way through maybe a generation that would not see it as clutter? I mean, this is like that box up there that has your bronze baby shoe in it,
Right?
And we need that thing. It's like, okay, but what do you memories, nostalgia, hoarding?
Right.
There you go.
Well, let's talk about a few things there. We can get to hoarding because roughly 80, maybe even 90% of us are hoarders to some extent. If you look at the clinical definition,
if you're honest,
there are 5 stages of hoarding. The ones we see on TV, the so-called hoarders, like it's easy to point and sneer and say, oh, I don't have that level of mental illness.
Yeah.
Right.
But most of us are stage 1 hoarders at least. So stage 1 hoarder is simple. Light clutter in 2 or more rooms. That's a stage 1
We're
hoarder.
in trouble.
And guess what? The stage 5 hoarder didn't go to stage 5 hoarding overnight.
Yeah.
Right.
They didn't wake up in a house that they could barely walk through, where exits are covered up, where there could be pet feces throughout the house. And I have a lot of compassion for people who are suffering because hoarding is on the OCD spectrum, and it's an inability to let go of anything, right? And if you can't let go of anything, what are you? You're trapped. You're imprisoned by your own circumstances.
Yeah.
Part of what you're talking about, though, is sentimental items, and those are the things that are really difficult to let go
Yeah.
of. I just say don't ever start with the sentimental items.
Go last.
Right.
Unfortunately, that's what I did. When my mom died, that's when I was first exposed to minimalism. I had to fly down to Florida. She had just retired at age 64. Now, we were poor, and she was living off of Social Security, basically, down in St. Petersburg, Florida, a little 1-bedroom apartment. And as soon as she moved down there, she found out she had stage 4 lung cancer. And then within a year, she was gone. And when I spent a lot of time with her that year down in Florida, and I had to make one last trip to deal with her stuff, basically. And we actually documented this in our last Netflix film. It's called Less Is Now. And I was going through all of her things, and she had about 3 houses worth of stuff crammed into a tiny 1-bedroom apartment. Because why? It was 65 years worth of memories, essentially. And I learned some really important lessons during that trip. The first thing I learned, this is really important, it goes to your question about memories. Our memories are not in our things. Our memories are inside us. Now, it's true that sometimes our things can trigger the memories that are inside us. So I took photos of a lot of her things I knew I didn't want to hold on to. She had like this giant antique chest. I didn't want to bring it home. Although at first, you know what I did? I called up U-Haul. And I asked for the largest truck they had. I needed one so big I had to wait an extra day for it to be available.
Right.
26-foot truck. And I didn't have storage space in my house because I already had a big house and a full basement full of my stuff, right? And I can't commingle mom's stuff with my stuff. And so I call up a storage facility. And I say, oh, how much for your biggest storage locker, right? And they quote a price, and I realize it's like $300 or $400 a month. Okay, well, I can't get rid of mom stuff because all of the memories are in those things. So I guess I'll pay $4,000 or $5,000 a year to hold on to those memories. And so as I'm going through all the things, I realized that these aren't things that were actually adding any value to her life. And if I'm being honest with myself, I'm not going to get any real value from them either. So I can pay thousands and thousands, tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of dollars to hold on to these things because they are quote unquote sentimental. Or if I let them go, you know what can happen? I can actually add value to other people's lives. And by letting go of some of those things, her friends and family, and donating them, they could get value from them. In fact, a lot of the things I was able to sell, I was able to give that money to the 2 charities that helped mom through her chemo and radiation when she was going through all of that, right? If I would have held on to it, selfishly clinging to those things, they wouldn't have gotten value. I wouldn't have gotten value. In fact, they would have gotten in my way. And so it was starting to understand some of those boundaries. And Laura, I know you asked a question earlier about like going through the things. 2 of my favorite rules in that minimalist rule book. One's the seasonality rule. I think this is really great for clothing. And so if you look at and say, okay, you pull any item of clothing out of your closet. Have I worn this in the last 90 days?
Yeah.
If not, will I wear it in the next 90 days? We call it the 90-90 rule. That pretty much covers every season, right?
Yeah.
If it's the fall and you say, okay, no, I didn't wear this winter coat in the summer, obviously, but I'm going to wear it in the winter. So yeah, it makes sense to hold on to it. I have to be honest with myself, obviously. And it doesn't have to be 90 days. You could say 1 year. Have I worn this in the last year? If not, what am I doing holding on to it still? Maybe I'm going to wear it next week, but I have to be honest with myself about it. The other one is my favorite rule. I call it the spontaneous combustion rule. You can take any item you own. It could be a camera. It could be a pillow. It could be a couch. It could be a shirt, a pair of jeans, a pair of shoes, something you find in your house, a sentimental item. And ask yourself, if this thing were to spontaneously combust, would I replace it? Or would I feel a sense of relief? And if I would replace it, okay, well, why would I replace it? Well, because I use it all the time. Well, obviously, though, I don't want to get rid of it. Minimalism is not deprivationism.
Yeah.
I don't want to live without things, although I think it's really helpful to temporarily deprive yourself of something to see whether or not it actually adds value to your life.
Yeah, it's also a spiritual principle.
There you go.
Yeah.
And so removing it for a period of time, not to renounce it, but to say, okay,
Yeah.
I'm fasting from this for a while, right? And it's like a material fast. But if the answer is, I would feel a sense of relief if this spontaneously combusted.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a sign I might want to let go.
That's
That
huge.
is a great rule.
I'm trying to think about the where to start. Like if you're hearing some of this stuff and you're overwhelmed with like you've talked about getting rid of one thing a day for 30 days. Is that close to?
Yeah. That's kind of where it started for me because we're so overwhelmed by stuff. You know what? I don't know where to start.
Right.
If you have 300,000 items in your home, but it all feels so important. It feels precious, right? Our things are precious to us. But of course, if everything's precious, then nothing
precious.
is precious, right? And so for me, it was like, you know what? I don't know where to start. I'm going to get rid of one item a day for 30 days. And I'm just going to see what happens. Well, the truth is I got rid of way more than 30 items because I just needed some momentum. Eventually, we turned this into something we call the 30-day minimalism game. We've had tens of thousands of people play this. You can download the free calendar on our website. But basically, it's just, here's how it works. You partner up with someone, a friend, a family member, a coworker, someone else in the household, maybe a mortal enemy, whatever you want to do, you partner up with someone who also wants to let go of some stuff. And you say, you know what, we're going to let go together. You bet whatever you want at the beginning of the month. Maybe it's $1, a nice meal, concert tickets, something fun. Because for me, I don't know about you, but decluttering is really freaking boring. I don't want to think about spending my weekend cleaning out my closet. But whenever you inject some friendly competition being the key here, it can make decluttering a lot simpler, a lot more enjoyable. And so the 30-day minimalism game is simple. You partner up with someone. First day of the month, you just have to get rid of one item. Second day of the month, 2 items. Third day of the month, 3 items. It starts really easy. Get you that momentum you need. Anyone can let go of one item today. Any item from somewhere. But by the middle of the month, it's more difficult. Today I have to get rid of 15 items, and tomorrow I have to get rid of 16 items? Uh-oh. Now it's more challenging. Whoever goes the longest wins. If you both make it to the end of the month, then you've both won because you've gotten rid of about 500 items, and that's a really good start.
Wow,
that's brilliant.
cool.
That's helpful.
That's awesome.
What about what part scarcity plays in having things, because I know it's a trap. We talked about it before we turned on these cameras, that like when you don't have money, you know, you're on this quest to get money so you can get things. And then sometimes when you find when people have money, there's even more pressure, because now you're like, I got to buy it while I have it. And I don't know if I'm going to get this again. Like, and it goes all the way back to the way we're taught to eat, which is get it all off your plate.
Mm-hmm.
There's kids in, you know, other parts where don't have any. You got to eat it all. And there is part of that floats around. I know I've felt that from time to time. Like, well, I probably should get it now in case something doesn't happen. And then, are we being good stewards of this? Like, maybe because we bought this, we should do this with it. Like, can you speak to this? What happens in our minds when scarcity starts to sit on the throne?
Yeah, when we are compelled by scarcity, there's a reason to be compelled by it, right? It's a basic, it means I don't have enough, right? And that was true when I was growing up. We didn't have enough money. I didn't have a felt sense of security in the neighborhood we grew up in. I didn't feel secure in the household before we got away from my father, because he was super physically abusive to my mom. My very first memory as a kid is my father extinguishing a cigarette on my mother's chest. And we didn't have enough. Like, I didn't feel like we had enough. And that's a real thing, right? And so we can't discount that. The problem is there are also billionaires who feel like they don't have enough money, right? I'm not pathologizing being rich. I think money is simply an amplifier. So if you have a really generous person and you give them money, then they're generous. A friend of mine is a pastor. I remember when I walked away from the corporate world, I took a 90% pay cut. In 2011, I made $23,000. That's what my tax return said on it. Now, I lived in Dayton, Ohio, and it was even difficult in Dayton, Ohio. But in a weird way, I was more financially secure that year than any year in my adult life. Actually, any year in my life, period. At age 30, I was more financially secure that year, making $23,000. And second, and more important, I was more generous that year than I had been in any year where I was making literally hundreds of thousands of dollars in Dayton, Ohio. And I realized, you know what? It was a friend of mine who was a pastor who said, well, yeah, if you're not generous now making $23,000, you're not going to be generous if you make $23 million either. And so generosity has always been, since then, has been, we call it responsibility, but that just means it's our ability to respond to the problems of the world. And so money gives you an ability to respond. However, if you carry forward the scarcity mindset that served you well for a while, but if I cling to that scarcity mindset, it ceases to serve me. In fact, it prevents me from being generous, which is the very thing that makes us feel alive and fulfilled.
The word minimalist, as you're talking, maybe some people associate it with maybe even boring or less than or like stale. Talking to you for any amount of time, you're like, if this is what minimalists are like, it's amazing, because it's bright and it's free and it's powerful. I think there is a misnomer when it comes to minimal, that it means poor Christian theology. Because there are Christians who have dipped into this life of like, God wants us to be this and we need to be poor. And even though it's astronomically false when it comes to theology, it's just that notion of we're just never supposed to, have more than enough and just feed our family. I think what you're proving is your quality of life is greatly enhanced by being really intentional by what you choose to possess.
Yes.
Is that fair to say?
By what I choose to possess and how I choose to spend my other resources as well.
So how do you spend your money? Because if it's not on things, like what do you find value in investing in?
Yeah. So a few things. I mean, there's some practical things as well, like saving for retirement. So 20% of my income I put into retirement accounts. So there are boring aspects to it. In fact, I want it to be boring.
Yeah.
I don't want it to feel like a casino where it's real exciting and what about the crypto and this particular stock? I hear it's going to be really hot next year. Like I don't want that level of excitement. I'm not allergic to excitement, but the pleasure chases, that's the same thing that I was doing with the material possessions. I don't want to do it with money. I don't want to do it with followers. I don't want to chase pleasure, because inevitably pleasure always leads to that drain of dopamine, that where you feel like that emptying and not a good sort of emptying out. What's the the Greek word kenosis, right? To empty oneself out in the service of someone. And so now, I mean, the Minimalists has 20 plus employees. That's one of the things that I do with the money, and we do a lot of live events. We're able to do them for free a lot of the time. Whenever possible, we'll do that. But I still spend money. I mean, I have a car. I drove here. I have a rather modest house.
What kind of car did you invest in?
I have a 10-year-old Toyota. And I've had it for 10 years too. So,
well, it just means you don't matter as much.
That's right.
Right away. It's like, I thought you were somebody special, and then I found out you're driving a Toyota from 2000. I'm like, I can't trust this guy.
That's right.
Had you rented a Lamborghini, like some of the guys we know, now I'm ready. Now I can receive.
If I can show you that I'm the type of person who deserves to be trusted, right?
Now we're going.
Yes. Yeah. It's funny. We were talking about something earlier about the houses and the things that these things are important for our lives as tools, and it's really useful. I also see minimalism as a tool. Yes, it can be a philosophy, but as a tool I use the same way a carpenter uses a hammer or a screwdriver.
I love it as a tool.
I'm simplifying my life because of what is important to me. My family is important to me. My relationships are important to me. Creativity is really important to me. And I found a bunch of different vehicles to create with, but primarily I really enjoy writing. I teach a writing class a couple times a year. I enjoy doing that. But the thing that I enjoy doing is sitting alone in an empty room with a blank screen and creating something from nothing. And so that doesn't require any money, really, but it does require other important resources: time, attention, energy, effort. These are other resources. We often forsake those resources in order to get this one other resource that we prize above everything else, the money. And then we say, oh, I forsake those resources, and I also forsook the people around me in my own life because, you know what? This money is really important. So I'm going to work. I worked 80 hours a week in the corporate world, sometimes more, 362 days a year. And it's like I was on call like a doctor, but I wasn't saving anybody. I couldn't even save myself. I weighed 100 pounds more than I weigh now. I was unhealthy. I was not creating. My relationships were kind of in shambles. And I didn't become the person I wanted to become. And I think part of that has to do because at least I didn't step back and ask why I wanted the things I wanted. There's this concept called mimetic desire or mimetic belief. But mimetic desire is simply, we desire the things the people around us desire. So if everyone desires the Lamborghini, guess what? I desire the Lamborghini. If everyone desires the most fashionable clothes, there's nothing wrong with the clothes. Right. But why am I wearing those? It's because everyone else around me. Or if maybe it's that dream home, right, that you were talking about. If I just got the dream home in Montecito, and then everything would be perfect. You know, the hip-hop artist Belly, he has this great line. He said, I bought my dream house, and I've been having nightmares in it. And I think that's quite often what happens. That's what happens with the American dream. We get everything we ever wanted. Be careful when you get it, because then you realize, wait a minute, maybe everything I ever wanted isn't actually what I wanted at all.
What do you want is such a beautiful question. You know, it's something that we're really familiar with, especially I've just seen it help a lot of people rather than answer the question that they think they're asking. Is like, well, what do you want? I just told you what I want. I want to start this business. I want it to be at this level. I want to say, yeah, but what do you want?
Yes.
I just told you I want, no, but what's that going to get you?
That's right.
And if there's no articulation off the back of that, you are heading for a deep well of unfulfillment. And it happens in every field. It's not, it's churches. It's whatever you choose to do. If you can't articulate what this thing is or what you're after, you get on that hamster wheel. Let me ask you this. It's a little bit of a right turn, but it matters. So Laura also goes by the name of Apocalypse Annie, meaning she has somehow found this freaking lane where every day something will show up at the door. I'm like, hey, babe, did you order
bit dramatic.
7 cases
not
of
day.
cotton balls? Wow. And then the next day something comes and I'm like, hey, babe, I wasn't aware that we needed 18,000 AAA batteries for what are we doing? And slowly but surely, we have a closet in our house that just in case the world ends, we've got at least 2 months of amoxicillin.
Okay, let's talk
in case
about
someone
this.
catches a cold.
Can I defend her for a second?
Please, I need somebody to, because I just want to make sure that the money that we spend on the possible apocalypse, I just want to know
It's gonna happen.
Just want to make sure it matters.
It's true that you can't prepare for everything, right? Although we can certainly try, and that's why I have at least one friend who is a legitimate prepper, not a hoarder, but a prepper in the sense that full basement and food rations for years.
The
and all
EMF.
Yeah.
Oh, you know terms, do you? Right? You got your apocalypse.
EMF's a totally different conversation. We turn our EMFs off in our house at night, but that's because my wife is super sensitive to
the other
Wi-Fi.
night she lays down an hour later. I said, "Are you still talking to me about?" Yeah, I don't care. Like she was talking it was like a presentation.
Laura, you will love. We did this episode called "Invisible Clutter." It's on the Minimalist podcast, and it's really about these sort of things like EMF and Wi-Fi and mold, toxic mold in houses, things like that. But let me defend her abundant purchases, because in that rule book we were talking about earlier, the Minimalist rule book, 16 rules for living with less. There are 3 things in there that I think are applicable here. One, we call it the 20/20 rule, or the just in case rule. Now, let me talk to you about the 3 most dangerous words in the English language. Just in case. They're so dangerous because they justify us holding on to anything. I hate that big orange sweatshirt that's oversized and it has tassels on it from 1996.
Let's just say we go to a University of Tennessee football game and have to play paintball.
Just in case. And so we can justify holding on to anything just in case. Just in case is a terrible justification because it forces you to cling to things that are no longer adding value.
Yeah.
However, there are 2 other types of items that I think we conflate with just in case. So there's the just for when items. Now, you don't buy your toothpaste one nurdle at a time, right? That's the little thing you put on top of your toothbrush.
Word.
That's
Never
one nurdle.
Nurdle?
And so you...
What kind of dork spent time going, this is what this is called now.
A nurdle.
And then someone went with it. There was like a meeting. People were like, lock it in.
Yeah, that's
what
right.
we're going to call a dollop of toothpaste.
Yeah, and so you don't buy your toothpaste one dollop or one nurdle at a time. You don't buy your toilet paper one square at a time. That'd be really inconvenient.
Yeah, it would.
You buy enough toilet paper just for when you need it, right? So just in case is one thing. A lot of consumables are just for when items. Now, we can hold on those things just in case. Like if you have a case of sardines and you decide I don't like fish anymore, now you're holding on to that just for when item just in case. That's when I let go of it. So if it's a just in case item, I tend to let go of it. Just for when items, as long as I have the space for it, like, I'm not going to order a whole pallet of toilet paper, but I'm going to buy more than one roll of toilet paper at a time too. It just makes sense for the sake of convenience.
Just for when.
Yeah, it's just for when. The other types of items are emergency items. These are actually just...
That's what I have.
Laura, here's my theory, though, marriage counselor, is if we're going in on this, that's not going to cut it. So I'm an all or nothing guy. I'm like, let's get 7 heavy, high-powered weapons. Because if the world does end, I'm just going to have to rob and steal. Like, this isn't going to cut it. So
I'm with you.
4 plate, I mean, I don't, that's not good enough. So if we're going to do this, we got to dig a tunnel and go straight up apocalyptic bunker. Your
Wait,
little
let him finish.
small portions.
Stop. Let him finish. I want to hear the...
You know what's
my
funny about this
justification.
is, like, I think you two would really enjoy the apocalypse together.
Yes.
It would be fun in the apocalypse.
I feel that same way about my wife, but you know what we won't care about during the apocalypse? How much toilet paper we have.
Reach.
That's true.
Now, there may be things. I might want some firearms during the apocalypse, and that's okay. But you know what? I'm not talking about the apocalypse here.
Yeah.
What I'm talking about is they're just for when items. I buy certain things out of convenience. I don't wait till I'm out of batteries to have batteries.
Right.
So I have a drawer that has just miscellaneous sundries like these things we're talking about. And I have a cabinet that has these miscellaneous toilet paper, paper towels. And that's it. That's the boundary for my things. I don't buy more than what will fit in there.
Yeah.
However, the emergency items, those are things that are just in case items that I hope I'll never have to use. Jumper cables for my car. That's a good example of an emergency item, right? A firearm is an emergency item unless you're using it to hunt. But if you're using it for protection around your house, I hope I never have to use that, but it's okay to have something like that.
Do you have a suit?
I do own one suit,
Just for when you have to go to a fancy dinner or do some
impromptu funeral, whatever it is. Yeah, I have one suit. Yeah.
How many pairs of shoes?
I don't know. I don't really count my stuff. That's another like interesting. It's not many, maybe 3 or 4, but it's an interesting misconception about minimalism, and especially it was for me early on, because when I first stumbled into minimalism, I found some really extreme, aggressive minimalists, and I thought that was really interesting. It makes cool for photos. One of my friends, his name's Colin Wright. He was a world traveler, and everything he owned 52 items. Everything he owned had to be able to fit into the overhead bin of an airplane, because he would travel somewhere, and he didn't even pick where he was traveling. He had his readers on his website determine a country, and he'd move to a new country every 4 months.
What a legend.
Based on where his readers sent him. So he was a minimalist, and his minimalism was a tool that allowed him to live that lifestyle. And so he counted his things because he had 51 things. I don't know how many things I own, but I know when a pair of shoes wears out, I will get rid of them, and I'll get a new pair, and I'm totally fine with that.
How many children?
I have 1.
So how old is she?
11.
How does she?
Even that's minimalist.
Yeah. So
That's amazing.
So did she just get with the flow, or did she push back, or
she pushed back in a non-pushback way, because I never went to my daughter and said, we are minimalists in this household, and damn it, you're going.
Know.
Yeah, she'd be like, what the hell is a minimalist?
Yeah.
And so I think early on it was much more about demonstrating through our actions what simple living looked like, as opposed to simply giving a label and saying, here's what we do because we are minimalists, or here's what we do because we are Christians, or here's what we do because we are filmmakers, or here's what we do because we are yoga practitioners, right? It's simply demonstrating the yoga is probably more useful than saying I'm a yoga practitioner and that's why we do what we do. Right. And so she sees the benefits of living simply. However, I'll say this. I remember I came home one day after a long day at the studio, and she goes, I just really enjoy my things. I said, that's great, sweetheart. And early on, I remember she would collect sticks and rocks and pieces of nature. She's super into nature, less into like plastic toys and stuff, but she would bring home rocks and shells, and we would set up boundaries around that, because as parents, our main function is to both enjoy our kids and also set up the boundaries or rules that prevent them from being harmed, but also make those boundaries elastic enough that they can hurt themselves a little bit and learn from the pain. Otherwise, we're putting them in a padded room and expecting them to develop into a normal, mature adult, and that doesn't work out very well.
No.
She becomes 23 and just starts buying stuff.
Right.
Like, what happened? She's just buying stuff.
And you know what? If she did, I wouldn't have any judgment around that. And sometimes we have to figure it out on our own. I've never told her that material possessions are bad or immoral or unethical. But I have shown her what the benefits of living a simple life are. And for her, the benefits are appreciably different. In fact, I never leapt up and said, look at me, I'm a minimalist. And then I went to my best friend, Ryan. We've been best friends since we were fat little fifth graders, by the way.
Wow.
And he's living back in Montana now. But we started the Minimalists together. We moved out to Montana together. And I never looked at him and said, hey, Ryan, I just became a minimalist, and you need to too, because you've got a lot of crap. And he did have a lot of crap. But what he did is he actually came to me one day and he said, hey, Millburn, why are you so happy lately? What the heck is going on with you, right? And so it opened up the door to talk about simplify my life, letting go of the superfluous to make room for what was actually important. Now, he's super type A, and he's like, wait, you spent 8 months getting rid of your stuff? How can I do this in 3 weeks? And so we came up with something called a packing party. It was in our last Netflix film where he boxed up everything as if he were moving, and he unpacked only the items he needed over the next 21 days. Now, y'all have moved a lot over the last half decade, right?
Well, trust me, I haven't even got to the counseling we're going to need about how we paid for 4 years, 3 different storage units throughout the country of stuff that we've never needed, but yet we had to, we had 3 of stuff. And there's some stuff that you look for and not have, but after a while, after 2 years of hey, that one storage in Cali, we've never thought twice about it, but we pay the bill for that
But
every
then
month.
I went and I literally got rid of, I don't even know how much.
It was a lot.
It was so much stuff. And I took my friend who is not great at throwing things away, but she's just one of my good friends. But she
we won't
was,
say her name, but Michelle Hines,
she
she's
was
a hoarder.
dying, couldn't believe, but I was like, we just needed to get everything into one storage unit because we'd moved from Jersey over to Cali, and then we'd gone to Cali to Florida. And so I just needed to get rid of it. But it actually was pretty devastating to see what I was throwing out. But I was in such a it all has to go, you know. But the only thing I regret out of all of those things was there was definitely a Christmas box that had some of the kids' little ornaments. But I was in such a
chuck it out,
throw it out stage. That's the only thing. Every Christmas I'm devastated, but that's it.
Yeah, that there's an interesting story that we tell ourselves about that, right?
Yeah.
And it feels so real because of that story. Now, let's say that you gave those same ornaments to me, right? Now, would I feel that same devastation if I let them go? Well, no, of course not. It's because I don't have that same story attached to them. And so we're often much more attached to story than we are to stuff.
Walk it out. So we get those ornaments and we're like, see, when you were little, you hung this up. And then we put it back and we do it again next year. That's the thing.
That's true.
Yep.
That's literally what we're talking about.
Some of it would make me feel bad because it's
I'm
from
with
your
you.
mom. Do you know what I mean?
I am my mother's son.
You
I'll
are.
look at it, I'll be like, man, I wore this in 8th grade and we won a city championship. That's awesome. Don't throw it away. It's gotta stay.
I've got a box of that. Yeah.
And so I took, when I took photos of many of my mom's possessions, it allowed me to keep those memory triggers without needing to hold on to all of the physical items that would fill up storage
That's
lockers.
a good idea.
So when you move, every time you move, you put everything in boxes and you move it to a new place. You are confronted with every material possession that you own that is outside of storage, but you're confronted with everything. Now, if you go home and you haven't moved for a long time, it's there, but you're not really confronted by it. You don't have to deal with it so much. It can be clutter, or it could be in a spare bedroom or a closet, or sometimes our spare bedrooms turn into just clutter rooms, right? Basements, attics, garages. I had a 2.5 car garage. By the way, I don't even know what a half car is.
No one does.
But it would only fit one car in it. Why? Because I had so many
much
other boxes
stuff.
and bits. And it looked nice and tidy and organized. I was a well-organized hoarder. And that's my problem with organizing, by the way. Most organizing is well-organized hoarding. And so when we did the packing party, Ryan boxed up all his things as if he were moving. And he spent the next 3 weeks unpacking only the items he needed. And he realized that after 3 weeks, 80% of his stuff was still in boxes. I don't use 80% of my things. All those things I worked the last decade for to make me happy, they were doing the opposite. They were just getting in the way. And that's really when he decided to let go. And that's when we started the Minimalists.com was after that. He came to me and said, hey, you've been writing for a long time. I know you just want to write fiction. You want to try this whole blog thing. And we did. And that's what led to the documentaries and the podcast and all the other stuff.
That is amazing.
I'm thinking about, there's mental health is such a important thing to me, and to a lot of people right now. But I am reminded of one of the greatest things I was ever told, and I share it with people when they want to know that one of the best ways to reset your life, if you're out of control, clean your room. And it is amazing how that can be, because you can't control so much, but you can go back to Nelson Mandela and his prison cell. How he kept his prison cell to even prisoners that are in reform versus you might not be able to control a lot around you, but when the concept that I gravitate towards whenever I think about what you represent is the most beautiful type of control, because I can't control so much, but I can absolutely, this square footage right here, it's going to be done with intention and dignity. It's going to be done right, and it's impossible for it not to flow into the rest of your life. So if someone's watching us right now talk about this and something's kind of pinging in their spirit, I always say run with that thing. Go start with your car. If you're having trouble with anxiety and stress, start with your car, and then just start to see how by bit, I know for her, it also benefits me romantically. But I know if I want to have a great date night, I'm like, kids, make sure that mother effing counter is clean because you're affecting my business now. Okay. So I know her brain works in peace. And so I think it's even tougher, Joshua, if you're a Christian, and both of us would claim to be guys that follow Jesus. We're both uncomfortable with that term because of what it represents, but it's tough to claim to be a follower of Jesus and not get this concept. That's how far, Jesus was very adamant about don't even just barely take the shirt on your back, because the point was always trust. It was always God's providence. It was, what does it gain if you get the whole world but you lose your soul. It's not like we don't know where this is going to lead.
That's right.
But we're in America. So it's like I'm a Christian and I got a lot of stuff. God's been faithful. I'm going to buy more stuff. It's like, I don't know if that's supposed to be the fruit of your faithfulness, is more stuff on top of the last stuff. What if more isn't more?
Yeah.
What if the less stuff we consume and decorate our lives with, the more of, maybe even if it was just God's presence and peace, it's worth it. It's worth a look.
Well, you said presence, right? Our last film was called Less Is Now. So it's a play on the Mies van der Rohe line, less is more. He was an architect, but
Less is now.
yeah, less is
Beautiful.
now, because
Yeah.
it's about having less so that you can be present in this moment. And you talk about Jesus. I mean, ultimately, he understood what love was. We confuse limerence with love, like this sort of feeling of obsession with someone like
Right.
that is love. Oh, I'm really obsessed with you. And I'm not against obsession. Sometimes like I get obsessed about writing from time to time, right? So I'm not pathologizing obsession even until it does become a pathology. If you have OCD, like I grew up with OCD, I have really bad. It was the only way I could control my environment at home because everything was out of control. I overate, and so I was obese, and I developed OCD so I could control the few things that were going on there in front of me. But that type of obsession actually gets in the way, and that's not love. To love is to see someone for who they are without trying to change them, without trying to manipulate them. You know, you can't say, well, I would love you if you just did these 7 things in this sequence. It's like, well, that's not love.
Well, I'm on
that's
a tryout for you. Yeah.
Right. That's a transaction. And there's nothing wrong with transactions, but let's not mistake it for love.
It's powerful. So if you going to let you go, unfortunately, because I want to pick your brain forever. I think it's a beautiful thing. I believe you've been on the cusp and started a movement that's going to impact generations behind you. I really do, because it's so much deeper than not having a lot of stuff. I mean, this is a foundational spiritual premise that you have built your life on, and I admire it. I think it's powerful. I think what our world needs more of are people that are. It was a huge adjustment for me to even rethink the way my calendar looks. And my therapist told me up front, she's like, you're going to have to get used to what you're going to feel is boredom. It's actually sober, consistent contentment. Because everything had to be maxed out for me. And there's people who are still like that. Like if you got an hour left, like if you watch these guys on TikTok, oh my gosh, like I watch it sometimes just to look at the carnage it's going to cause. It's morbid. But I wake up at 5:30 a.m. and I go down, they do this list of all the stuff they do. And you're like, man, I don't think that sounds good at all. Like I had to get used to, and the other day I came home with Laura, I was like, man, I have arrived in a new place because I am done at this time. And I was looking forward to sitting right here on this chair next to you, and I have nothing to do but wait around and see if one of our kids can be bothered to even hang out for 5 minutes. That's my endeavor tonight. And that to me would have been foreign before because I could have been doing more. But how did that end up for me? I can definitely stand here confidently and say I lived a life of so much more, like more production, more this, more that, more this, more people, more help, more reaching. And where it leads, just of my own personal experience, is not beautiful. But even the new horizon of less is more, the peace that you live with, you can't fake it. You can't fake any of your peace. Like if people had, their contentions with the minimalist picture, have you ever sat down and talked to someone who has done this for a while? It's tough. It's a very convicting and challenging. I came home from doing y'all's podcast. I was like, I felt bad about my number of bracelets. I've been working on this arm party for damn near 10 years, and I sat there. I'm like, I should have only had one. I know that's not the point of what you're saying, but
sure. And I hope it never comes off as judgmental either.
It doesn't.
My lifestyle is never.
You don't have a hint of.
No.
You don't have to. You're too confident for that. I think people that are judgy are just inherently insecure, so they're desperate to get their views onto you. You go the opposite. It's like, hey, take it or leave it. I just happen to have my life isn't perfect, but the contentment that we're all after, I think that's the number one thing that people want in our world. They just don't know how to articulate it. Like, I want a better job. I want more money. I want this. Hey, what you really want is to be content with yourself when you're still.
Yeah.
That is the prize.
Yeah. And so empty space is really the way that I've been able to, now it could be in the physical realm as well, having empty space. When you go to a museum and it's just stunning. We were talking about the Fort Worth Museum with Hector a moment ago, and it's like one of the most beautiful places. It might be the most beautiful place I've ever been. Ando, the architect, famous Japanese architect, designed the Fort Worth Art Museum. And you don't even need any paintings in there. The paintings in there are stunning as well. But it's filled with what? It's filled with empty space. It's the presence of absence. There's part of that is true with the calendar. So removing the calendar clutter and being content with the open space. Now, quite often we hear people say, yeah, I just feel this void in my life. I feel
right.
Maybe it's not a void. Maybe it's just open space.
Yes.
I used to live in Montana. I live up in Ojai now, and they're pretty similar. There's a lot of open space there. And I didn't show up in Montana and go up to Glacier National Park and say, what is up with this void? We need to get condos here immediately.
Right.
No, it's recognizing, wow, this is beautiful because of the empty space. We can be present because of the empty space.
Because of.
Yeah.
There was an explosive moment with my son the other day, and I watched it unfold. Like his phone died, and then the TV wouldn't work, and then his games were messed up. And he was just like, "What do we do now?" My guy, this is when we start talking about what real life is. It's like the thought of not being entertained and stimulated. It's like
that's
the
a
world.
huge problem.
Yeah, I mean,
for kids, like being bored is okay. You used to have a hard time with the kids being bored, and I'm like, this is good for them. Like. Being bored makes you have to have it to be creative. Like get creative with your little brain. Like, but kids don't have that anymore.
We have become so used to pacifying ourselves with entertainment, with so-called information, and some of it is more virtuous than others. Well, no, I'm not listening to podcasts. I'm listening to an audiobook, so therefore I'm an erudite individual, right? No, it's all stimulation from other minds. What is solitude? Solitude is the absence of stimulation from other minds.
Stimulation.
So, being by yourself
Absence of
doesn't
other
mean that
minds.
you're in solitude. Because you can be listening to a podcast, and there's nothing wrong with those things.
Yeah.
But when's the last time that you raw dogged a flight, or raw dogged the drive to work, or just raw dogged an evening by yourself?
When was the last time you had a day where no other commentary formed your worldview or your perspective that day? It's because I used to push back against reading Bible commentaries in my actual Bible. And I used to tell people, you can do it, but understand like what that guy wrote in that paragraph underneath Psalm 23, that's his interpretation. It's not the Bible. So you can't even read the Bible without having one that has commentary from people in it. It's not the worst thing in the world, but I like the idea of what would our world be like? What would our marriage be like? What would our life be like if we didn't compare it and allow other people's commentaries? Because we've had days where both of us will be on two different tracks of the same train. So like we need to rent, not buy. And I'm like, I'm definitely leasing cars. I'm not. And like, who did you listen to today? Grant Cardone. What about you? This guy. Oh, okay. And then tomorrow we're on something else, and it's like, just for a day, what would my life be like if I ran it? With how I feel, with what God spoke to me, and I appreciate the presence of much wisdom. But there comes a point where it's like let me look online and see what's cool. I don't know about that. Like maybe not. So it's a very funny thought to think about. I have never put it the way you put it, but it's a beautiful. Solitude doesn't mean you're by yourself, still with other voices. Yeah, it means you realize there's something in you that is special enough to get its own time. And something.
Don't you think that when you're healthy, if you're able to sit by yourself and be in silence? Because I know so many people who just cannot do that ever. They have to have music on. They have to be stimulated by the TV or a screen, or because they're so unwell in themselves is what I believe is the case, is that it's a real problem.
Yeah, and it's not their fault either.
It's not.
Their culture has indoctrinated them that not only is it the right thing to do, it's the thing that you should do, right? And so then it becomes a prescription, and therefore there's no downtime, and make sure you're always learning. But the answers, you have them all within you already. And some of these other people can amplify some of the things that are already going on inside you. And so, the mechanical things like, should I lease a car, buy a car, or should it be 15% of my retirement account or whatever, those are fine. And there are mechanical answers for that. But for affairs of the heart and affairs of the soul, there's not a mechanical 3-step plan. Yeah, I can help you declutter your closet, But if you don't know why you decluttered your closet, a month from now, a year from now, it'll be recluttered with even more things.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Give me
So good.
as we close this moment of our conversation, which I'm going to please, it's open invite. You're such a blessing. Like you make me better. Whether it's from a distance listening or being able to actually hang with you, you're explosively contagious in the best way. What would you say to somebody who is on that threshold of maybe it is that kind of life where, because you've experienced deep poverty, you've experienced it, like what can you tell somebody, what can they expect should they take this leap into, because we're not trying to change your whole world in a day, but I did want to have you on to be able to help some people reset. It's probably the number one why. Like why am I going to ask you in the middle of your life, can you drive to where we are? Because I believe there's a supernatural breakthrough for somebody who can get this essence and start a reset. And it seems small, but what do you say to someone who's like, I don't know, I'm clinging to my stuff. What do you say to that person? Because you're not a convincer, you're not into making people do what you do, but what would you say?
Yeah, it's not my hope to convince anyone of anything. In fact, I think convincing someone is to unlove them, but to meet them where they are and just say, like, I totally get it. I understand. There's no judgment. I remember when we first started doing book tours, and here was our business model, Ryan and I. We'd left the corporate world. If we sell enough books tonight, we can split a room at the Hampton Inn. If not, we'll sleep in your Toyota Corolla, and that's fine. We'll move on to the next city the next night. That was our business model, right? And occasionally people would let us, like, coming to our events, they'd let us stay at their house. And every time we get to their house, guess what they say? Now, I'm not a minimalist, because they thought that there was going to be some sort of judgment there. That I was going to come in and like condemn them and remove their minimalism certificate from their hands or something. And what I realized is that we're all struggling with the same things.
Yes, we are.
We all struggle with the mental clutter, the spiritual clutter, the
need to be
emotional
validated,
clutter.
the need to be accepted.
Yeah. We all struggle with those same things. And quite often that manifests in the material things. And what I would say is that if you're holding on to material possessions that are no longer serving you, why are you holding on to them? Can you afford to continue to hold on to them? And can you afford to not let go? Because letting go, by the way, is not something you do. Letting go is something you stop doing. You stop clinging to the material possessions. You stop clinging to the job title and the identity. You stop clinging to the toxic relationships. You stop clinging to the career clutter. You stop clinging to the spiritual clutter. This is a really difficult one. You stop clinging, and this was really difficult for me. Stop clinging to the self-righteousness. Letting go of that. And you don't even have to let it go right away. You can just loosen your grip on it a little bit. And as you loosen your grip, you realize, like, oh, this is kind of heavy. Why have I been carrying this for so long? You talked about judgment a moment ago, and I think it's right. Judgment is a mirror that reflects the insecurities of the judge. So every time I judge something, I say, that's stupid, or that person has too much stuff, or I could never. Yeah, it's right. I'm simply holding up a mirror to myself and saying, oh, there's where my insecurities are.
Thank you for doing what you do. Thank you for taking bold steps, which has produced, freedom and fruit for a lot of people. And you're an incredible person. So we're grateful. Lights On is immediately better because you have taken the time to come, and
thank you.
We're gonna go fight as a couple about what to let go because I'm pretty minimal.
I'm an emergency hoarder.
Well, I love you both, and I'm
you.
grateful you
Thank
decided
you.
to spend this time with me.
Thank you, brother. Okay.